Hey everyone, Rua here. I'm glad to see that there's still an active interest in this series on real-world history and mythology one can find in Vana'diel. I really wasn't sure if it'd persist, but here we are with episode 4. Okay, let's get into it. Some of these are quite obscure, and I hope that you'll enjoy them. In this series, we've covered famous swordsmiths from Japanese history, but you might have wondered if Europe had smiths of their caliber. It did indeed. Andrea Ferrara was a famous Italian swordsmith who lived in the 16th century. To understand Ferrara, you need to understand the where, and especially the when, he came from. Ferrara's hometown was Fonzaso, a town in the Belluno province of the wider Veneto region. More important than where is when Ferrara lived. The Italian Renaissance was a great cultural and intellectual revolution that irreversibly changed Europe. Reaching its peak in the 15th and 16th centuries, the Renaissance was widely seen as heralding the end of the Middle Ages and the ushering in of the modern world. Venice, which was only 100 kilometers south of Ferrara's hometown, was essential in this remarkable era as its trade networks helped create the wealth that laid the foundations for, well, everything that followed. The Venetian Republic saw the value in artisans and the education of the same. So the wealthiest of its citizens became patrons of artisans and craftsmen. Ferrara was making swords in this time. Venice was a safe haven and trading hub for merchants and craftsmen from the Arabic and Oriental worlds. If Constantinople was the crossroads of the world, then Venice was the gateway to Europe. With patronage and the influence of foreign craftsmen, Ferrara's legend began as he forged blades of incredible quality. Ferrara's workshop was called Basigal. Built along the river Ardo, which runs through Belluno, the workshop became a place aspiring smiths would visit in the hopes of being taken on as his apprentices. Amazingly, Basigal stands to this very day, albeit in a state of considerable disrepair. Ferrara's skill in swordsmithing became so widespread that it transcended borders. At some point in the early 16th century, he was hired by King James IV of Scotland, himself a strong believer in the ideas of the Renaissance. King James's reason for inviting Ferrara to live and work in Scotland was simple. The country often found itself at odds with its English neighbour to the south, and in the event of another conflict, which was always seemingly around the corner, he wanted his soldiers to have the finest blades in Europe. What's fascinating is that over time, the initial designs the Scots had learned from Ferrara were perfected even further. What began as a take on the symbolic Highland claymore gradually evolved into a now iconic design of a basket-hilted broadsword. If either sword variant was deemed of high enough quality, it was referred to as a true Ferrara and engraved as such, implying that the Scottish swordsmith in question had learnt and mastered the techniques of Ferrara. The original design of the Highland claymore was cumbersome, but Ferrara's versions were considerably lighter. The blades rarely broke, even under immense force, and when used to deal horizontal strikes. The Ferrara of Vana'diel seems to pay homage to the claymores Ferrara initially made for King James if you're going off its model. Another nod can be found in the base delay of the greatsword. It's the lowest of any greatsword in the game. Remember that Ferrara's swords were famously light, and this makes a lot more sense. Ullr was the god of winter and archery in Norse mythology. According to the Icelandic poet and historian Snorri Sturluson in his Prose Edda, Ullr is the son of Sif and the stepson of her husband Thor. Ullr possessed warrior-like attributes and was often called upon to aid the Aesir in times of battle. Ullr was also the god of hunting. He had a hall in Asgard which is called Yaldir, which means Yule Grove, linked to the Viking belief that yew was the best wood for bows, although they were also made from ash or elm when yew was not available. Given the lands of northern Europe the Vikings hailed from, Ullr being the god of both winter and archery was something of an inevitability. Ullr was revered by hunters, and many paid tribute to him in hope of his favour during the exceptionally difficult winter months. Another popular belief among the Vikings was that the Aurora Borealis, as we now know it, was of Ullr's creation, and its arrival signified that he was hunting in preparation for a feast in Asgard. Although not much else has been recorded about Ullr beyond the Prose Edda, He must have been a very important deity in the Norse pantheon because, according to one tale in the Edda, Odin himself offered Ullr's favours as a reward to mortals and gods alike. The Ullr of Vanadil is a bow with a rather unique design. It resembles a longbow, incidentally the bow of choice of the Vikings, but it has runes engraved in a frost-like colour adorning it, potentially a reference to Ullr's status as the Norse god of winter. The bow has a unique animation when firing arrows, with what looks like a light emanating from it with each shot. This could be a reference to Ullr's association with the Aurora Borealis, the Northern Lights. Ullr might be one of the more obscure Norse gods, but the next one is one I'd wager most have heard of, if not know well. The Laevateinn was the weapon crafted by Loki, the trickster god and god of fire in Norse mythology. Even if you know practically nothing about Norse mythology, there's a very good chance you've come across Loki in some form in various media. It seems that everything from modern novels and reimaginings of the Norse gods, to Japanese animation, and of course the Marvel Cinematic Universe has a take on this figure. How successful each interpretation is varies wildly. Loki is typically typecast as a malicious trickster, something akin to an evil schemer and a constant thorn in the side of the Aesir, but really, Loki was known for being neither good nor evil, sometimes being a great help, like when he helped Thor recover Mjolnir, and other times being a great nuisance, like the time he got Balder killed. Loki's purpose was to always create chaos, to usurp power structures and orders of rule that become too self-assured of their righteousness. He was chaotic neutral personified, or rather deified. You see, the Vikings did not see chaotic upheaval as necessarily evil. It was actually periodically expected in the tumultuous world in which they lived. Loki was therefore the deification of their reality. One of the most common mistakes made when depicting Loki is the form of his Laevateinn. Modern depictions show it as a flaming sword, but in actuality the Laevateinn's a staff, but this can be explained. The first mention of the Laevateinn comes from the Poetic Edda. The Poetic Eddas are the oral literature of Iceland, which were finally written down sometime in the 11th century. The tale in question is Fjolsvinnsmal, where Loki's weapon was referred to as Laevateinn, meaning sure striking arrow, which many took to mean a sword. Laevateinn then took on the name Laevateinn, meaning wounding wand, when the Norwegian linguist Sophus Bruges published his revision of the Poetic Edda with a more accurate translation in 1867. The Laevateinn of Vanadil is very accurate to its inspiration. It's the most powerful staff a black mage can use, and since Loki was considered a god of fire, this is quite fitting. The weapon skill attached to the staff is Vidalhunir, and it refers to the reason Loki made the staff, to defeat Vidalhunir, a giant rooster that sat atop Mímurníodd, a tree often taken to be identical with the world tree Yggdrasil. Zulfiqar was the sword of Ali ibn Abi Talib, companion of the Islamic prophet Muhammad. He is one of the central figures in Shia Islam, being regarded as the rightful immediate successor to Muhammad and the first imam by all branches of Shia Muslims. The Zulfiqar was originally the sword of Muhammad himself, bestowed upon him by Jibril when he prayed to Allah for help against the Qurayshi Meccans during the Battle of Uhud in 625 AD. During the battle, Ali split the shield and helm of the strongest Meccan warrior, but also shattered his own sword in the process. Impressed by this feat, Muhammad gave Ali the Zulfiqar, which he used to great effect. He used it so well in fact that a well-known saying, attributed to Muhammad, arose: "There is no hero and man like Ali, there is no sword like Zulfiqar." The Zulfiqar was historically depicted as a scissor-like double-bladed sword, earning it its name, which roughly translates to spine splitter. The sword featured often on Muslim flags historically and still to this day, most notably on those of the Ottoman Empire's Janissaries in the 16th and 17th centuries. It is also commonly shown in Shia depictions of Imam Ali, often along with the saying Muhammad said in praise of his companion. Famously, Muhammad had 9 swords, all of which survive to this day. 8 reside in the Topkapi Museum of Turkey, and the 9th resides in Cairo, Egypt. The Zulfiqar, however, was never found after Imam Ali's life. leading many to believe it was returned to Allah. With this in mind, Square Enix actually made a mistake in translating their Zulfiqar to Vana'diel, though not an obvious one. The in-game model for the Zulfiqar features a scissor-like blade, but the blades rejoin at the tip. The Zulfiqar was always shown as having a split at the end of its blade. It's a strange design choice since there's another sword model that closer matches that of the true Zulfiqar, and that's the Montante. The Montante is itself a reskin of the Algol, and both weapons are obtained in Artagan. Artagan is a region of Vana'diel clearly inspired by the Islamic world, perhaps even the Ottoman Empire itself. Considering this, the decision to not swap the names of the Zulfiqar and the Montante is puzzling, but it is what it is. The Almace was the sword of Archbishop Turpin in the 11th century French epic poem The Song of Roland. The Song of Roland is the oldest surviving major work of French literature and exists in various manuscript versions, which testify to its enormous popularity. The Song of Roland centers on the Frankish military leader Roland in the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass in 778 AD, during the reign of Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman Emperor. Poems are difficult to use as historical sources since they blur the line between fact and fiction. That was kind of their purpose, to glamorize otherwise grim events. The Battle of Roncesvalles Pass saw a large force of Basque tribesmen ambush a part of Charlemagne's rearguard in the Roncesvalles Pass, a high mountain pass in the Pyrenees on the present border between France and Spain. After Charlemagne's invasion of the Iberian Peninsula, the Basque attack was a retaliation for Charlemagne's destruction of the city walls of the Basque capital, Pamplona. As the Franks retreated across the Pyrenees back to Francia, the rearguard of the Franks was cut off. The rearguard stood their ground long enough for Charlemagne to complete his retreat, but they paid with their lives. Among those notable killed in the battle were 12 paladins of Charlemagne's court: Oliver, Gerin, Gerier, Berengier, Othon, Samson, Angelio, Yvon, Ivore, Anceus, Girard, Ogier, and of course, Turpin. Their deaths elevated the surviving paladins to the foremost warriors of Charlemagne's court and into legend, becoming the quintessential role models for European knights. Although a devout Christian and archbishop, Turpin was a formidable warrior. His sword was called the Almace, the name deriving from the Old Norse Allmakt, meaning almighty. Turpin killed so many enemies with the Almace that it was rumoured to have been blessed by the Archangel Gabriel herself. This belief was set into legend with the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass, which finally claimed Turpin's life. According to the legend, Turpin was among the last of the paladins to fall, and he continued to fight on despite being impaled with 4 spears and riddled with arrows. That's quite something. The Almace of Vana'diel pays tribute to its real-world historical origins well. The weapon skill attached to the Almace is Chant du Cygne, Swan Song. A swan song is the final performance of an actor, singer, or in this case, a warrior. According to folklore, swans sing most beautifully right before they die, so this phrase came to be used to describe someone who is leaving their profession or leaving life in style. Remember how Archbishop Turpin died while wielding the Almace? And there you go. The Culverin was the ancestor of the musket, first entering circulation in the late 15th century and reaching the height of its popularity in the 16th century. The Culverin was a creation stemming from the introduction of Arabic and Oriental engineering on Europe from the Renaissance. The Culverin fired solid round-shot projectiles with a high muzzle velocity, giving it a pretty long range and a flat trajectory. Round shots were basically miniature cannonballs loaded into the firing tube of the Culverin. Its user could opt to use a single but larger cannonball for longer range engagements with more precision, or use several smaller cannonballs for closer range engagements, essentially making it the first shotgun in history. The Culverin was a game changer for European warfare. Knights had reasonable protection from arrows, but the introduction of round shot which could pierce plate armor irreversibly changed everything. Culverins were initially handheld, but higher caliber culverins required support to fire lest they injure their user from the recoil of the shot. The Culverin would eventually be phased out as firearms technology progressed even further, but discovering the progenitor of many of the creations that came after is still fascinating. The Culverin of Vana'diel is a very unique weapon. It has a distinct model that resembles a pump-action single-bore cannon, or a shotgun. It's also the only marksmanship weapon in the game that requires special ammunition to fire, namely the cannon shell or the heavy shell, both aspects referencing its status as the first widespread used hand cannon. Although it will never be used in today's game, there is always the chance an eye-level version of it could be released. Although most of Japan's samurai warriors were men, there were some women who bucked social norms to become skilled and dangerous enough to be considered peers, if not paramounts, like the famous 12th century samurai Tomoe Gozen. Even before the rise of the samurai, there were Japanese women who trained to protect their homes and families from invading armies. These women were known as the Onabu Geisha, which literally means woman warrior. Although the Onabu Geisha used whichever weapons they could in defense of their land, they had an affinity for the naginata, a polearm with a long, curved blade. The naginata became the symbol most strongly associated with the Onabu Geisha, both as their weapon of choice and as an indication that they belonged to the warrior class. Tomoe Gozen was not technically an Onabu Geisha, but an Onamusha, a woman who was part of the action on the battlefield, rather than being on the defensive at home. The story of Tomoe Gozen is shrouded in mystery, but she was known for being both beautiful and terrifying. What's truly impressive about the legend of Tomoe is not just that she was a female samurai, but she was an elite samurai and the one that other samurai feared. According to general consensus, Tomoe served Minamoto no Yoshinaka during the Genpei War, the war that led to the establishment of the first shogunate. The Genpei War had laid waste to Japan for 5 years between 1180 and 1185, marking a dramatic end to the aristocratic Heian period. Yoshinaka's poor leadership skills meant that his own family eventually turned on him. In 1184, his army was decimated, and as he fled from Kyoto, he only had a handful of warriors left, including Tomoe. What happened next varies between two accounts. According to one account, Tomoe encountered 2 renowned enemy generals during this retreat. Before she could kill the first general, he decided to turn tail and flee, rather than let his family be tainted with the shame of him being killed by a woman. The second did not run, and Tomoe beheaded him with her naginata. Another version of the story insists that Yoshinaka told Tomoe that as a woman, she had better retreat. Whatever his reasoning, Tomoe just refused him. Tomoe said that she wanted to kill at least one more worthy opponent to honor Yoshinaka. Exactly who that was varies again depending on the source, but it seems that when a group of rival warriors approached, Tomoe rode straight at them, grabbed their leader, and decapitated him in front of them. Whichever story you follow, it seems that Tomoe had a fondness for decapitating people with her naginata. There are many polearm in Vana'diel samurai can use, but only the Tomoe resembles a true naginata. In fact, I think it actually has a unique model. Tomoe used a variety of weapons, but her greatest feats were accomplished with a naginata. Having a naginata in Vana'diel that bears her name is a great nod to the famous Onamusha, who remains an icon to this day. That's all I have for episode 4. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.